Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.
This is William Pullen, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, the UK's biggest paranormal network. And this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
Hello, welcome to another show. Thank you, William, for that intro. Very nice of you to do that for me. Right, I've got as you know, I've been doing some calls out for people. I've got a call out for Brian McMullen in Glasgow, Scotland, UK. It is in the UK. Maureen Waters, Newcastle upon Tyne, UK. And another good friend of mine, Peter Robbins in New York, US. He was a guest on, the third guest I had on this show. Now I've got, as you know, we unfortunately we lost Stan Friedman, just over a week or so ago now, and I've got another good friend of his as a guest today, Donald Schmitt, who's kindly dropped everything and agreed to come on the show and give us an insight into his own work and his friendship with Stan. So I'd like to waste no more time and introduce Donald Schmitt. Hello, Don.
Hello, David. So nice to be with you this evening for you. It's mid-afternoon for me here.
It is. Yeah. What's the weather like? Is it okay?
It's actually gorgeous, mid-60s and low humidity and
nice.
Bright. We've had a very rainy spring.
Yeah, I know you've had quite a lot of unusual weather over in the States there, haven't you?
Yes, but at least, sadly, for all the tornadic activity just south in the southern states from here, so we've been spared. We've been fortunate in that regard.
Anyway, like I say, my sincere condolences. I know Stan Friedman was a very good friend of yours.
Yes.
I don't really know what else to say with that. I mean, how did you hear the news? Because it was quite a shock, and it seemed to be a bit of a rumour mill at first on Facebook that I heard it.
Well, it was, but even before that, because last year at the Roswell Festival in July, we had a farewell party for Stan. He had announced officially his retirement.
Yeah.
And we had a party on Thursday evening before the festival even kicked off. And I stood at the podium and I spoke my personal feelings and shared some questions with the audience. And it was very heartfelt in that we knew that Stan was ailing at the time. And that he felt that with whatever time he had left, that he'd like to spend it with family. And then when it appeared as though his health had leveled off, that he had improved, and he announced that he once again would be returning for this festival over the 4th of July weekend here in the States. And so we had exchanged some phone calls, and I was looking forward to once again seeing him. And then I get this frantic phone call from the deputy director at the museum, Karen, that I hear that Stan had passed away. And I had no idea. And let me call Mariana, Stan's wife, and at least hear directly, and hopefully Stan will pick up the phone. And so I called the direct line, and I got Mariana's voicemail, and that caused pause to begin with, because normally Stan, I thought he should have been home based on his schedule. And then when he did not pick up, and then when she did not pick up, I feared the worst. And within the next half hour, we confirmed that he had a speaking engagement in Columbus, Ohio, just the evening before. And as he was connecting through the airport in Toronto, and mind you, Stan had some heart surgery just 3 years before. He had some stents put in. And in fact, that was the first time he missed the festival in Roswell. So we even piped in over speakerphone that the audience could wish him all get wells for his quick recovery at that time. And so to learn that it was a heart attack, and what really, dismayed me was the fact that once again he was traveling alone, 84 years old, and having a heart condition, and also suffering from a few other ailments, and that there he was traveling alone. And we can do a lot of should have and would have, but he went out doing what he loved to do.
Yeah, he pushed himself to the limit, it seems to me, It's,
And he had mentioned the Kathleen Martin just a week before that he was feeling very tired.
Yeah, she said that on the last show, actually, because I did have her on my previous show. And she was saying that, much the same, that he had told her that, to be honest, to the likes of me, I didn't know that he was actually suffering. I thought maybe he's got another 10 years in him and he'll be around, It was quite sudden to the likes of me,
No, we that's why when he announced his retirement last year, we felt it was for the better. We felt that he most likely had limited time, and that he should certainly spend it with the family. And for whatever reason, whether he asked the doctor, should I give it one more year, or
yeah, as you do, yeah.
I mean, you could check his schedule. He was newly booked for conferences.
That's why I find it so amazing. We knew he'd retired, and we thought, well, why is he still booking himself into conferences? And
I think he saw that he had one more good fight, as they would say, left in him.
Yeah.
And he was willing to give it his all. And Stan was never one to cancel a talk. He was always, Johnny on the spot. He relished the opportunities. He loved the audiences. He loved the band and he loved a good debate, as you know, David. I mean, he was never one to, turn away such an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, this is what I was saying to Kathy last week. I had probably about 3 or 4 minutes to speak with him, that all in all. But in that 3 or 4 minutes, he gave you his full attention. You didn't think that he wasn't sort of only halfway there. And you sort of appreciate that from someone, that they're actually listening to what you're saying, probably things he'd heard a million times before, But,
yes, but he's still, and that's why he was so much in that regard like Dr. J. Allen Hynek, in that you could approach him with the most mundane, light in the sky, story, sighting. And he would, give you all due respect, and he would discuss, the event with you, and that was the wonderful thing about them, that they realized that they were discussing something that to the novice would be explaining, a genuine experience on their part, and they treated it as though it was genuine, whether it was Hynek or Friedman. They didn't just brush it off and, could you come back and talk to me later, or I really don't have time for that.
Yeah.
I never saw Hynek do that, and I never saw Friedman do that. And that is much to both of their credits. And that's why both of them, have left tremendous voids now in their passing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It's all very sad, but we have got his legacy of all the research and the books that he's left us. So I think it's just the suddenness of it all, going just like that, just like a light going out, isn't it?
Well, with Hynek, we had a good year. in preparing for the end with the brain tumor, the brain cancer, and all the subsequent treatment and the failed efforts in trying to buy him some time. But as you just mentioned, David, with Stan, I mean, it was a complete shock. I mean, where, as I described, that for the better part of an hour, we were frantically making calls and trying to determine whether it was true and hoping that it was nothing but, one of those rumors. I even hearkened back to that time when the late comedian Bob Hope, and it was a member of Congress here in Washington, made the premature announcement that he had just received word that Hollywood comedian and major star Bob Hope had just passed away. And he hadn't. It was just...
Yeah. You do get those. I know. It's terrible, isn't it?
An anonymous bad rumor. And thank God for the moment.
Yeah.
And so we had that, that genuine hope that maybe that indeed would be the case with Stan Friedman as well.
Yeah,
but,
of course. Well, you do get a lot of fake news on Facebook, but I mean, Facebook really lit up with all the different reports. A few people saying that it can't be true, and there's somebody even asked me because I'd put a post up. Somebody said even to me, "Are you sure? Has this been verified?" And I said, "Well, as far as I know, it has been verified. Yeah, it's all very unfortunate, but as you know, the whole of Facebook, that's all everyone was talking about, because it was such a big thing.
But he certainly did live a very fruitful 84 years. He accomplished, he traveled, he, did more to spearhead the authenticity, the very acceptance of UFOs being real. And I know he liked to always say that flying saucers were real. Getting back to, even beyond unidentified flying objects. Well, yeah, unidentified flying objects are real.
Yeah.
They're just unidentified.
Yeah.
But him to take it that step further and say, no, we know that we're being visited, that we're being visited by a technology, by an intelligence off the planet. And that he would refer to the cover-up as a cosmic Watergate, as he called it. And he'd like to coin these phrases and, don't bother me with the facts. I've already made up my mind.
That's right, yeah.
Noisy negativist. And and again, he loved to go into the arena of debate. He loved to challenge not the skeptics, but the scoffers, the debunkers that appeared as though they too had their minds made up.
Yeah, he did enter the Bob Lazar debate, didn't he? Quite friendly, quite recently, didn't he?
Yes, he did, and he stood his ground, whether it was Bob Lazar or MJ-12 or some of the aspects of Roswell. He didn't back down to anyone. You had to prove him, being wrong. You had to demonstrate that he was wrong on a particular issue, and then, and only then, would he back down. Would he then, essentially go back to square one and, now why did I believe this? Why did I fall for this?
Well, we've all done it. We've all done it, Don. I'm sure you've been fooled a few times as well.
God knows I have. And that's the problem with a phenomenon that is a phenomenon.
Yeah.
But just very definition where we don't have a manual, an owner's manual, a handbook to always go to when we receive this information or that information. And especially when we're dealing with a possible technology well beyond our own, should we be surprised that at times it throws us a curveball, that it springs something on us that we have nothing prior in our lives to resort to explain, what it turns out to most times, to be very prosaic, very conventional.
Yeah.
So we have to have this latitude in that, as I described Hynek and Friedman, that we can't dismiss every story just because we don't like the way it sounds. We have to always be the investigator first.
Yeah.
And God knows we come up with 95% of reports that are explainable. But all it's going to take, David, as you know, as we both know, is that one just that one case, that one incident, that one photograph, that one video, that one piece of hardware that finally just blows it wide open.
Well, like you, I know what I saw, so you know, I know you can't persuade other people about what you saw, but I know what I saw. So,
and that's the wonderful thing when you can say, "I know what I saw."
Yeah, that's the famous saying.
Experience. And in my case, I haven't had an experience. I haven't had a sighting per se. I mean, we've all seen things in the sky that, you know, maybe defied explanation, and we look back and we go, yeah, that was puzzling. But it doesn't prove it was anything extraterrestrial off the planet.
No.
But when you actually experience something and you can honestly say, my God, what else could it have been?
Well, so I'll just show you quickly what I saw. It was an orange oval object going across the night sky, pulsating. And it was, and that was around about 1966 when I saw that.
66 when the technology was still rather pristine, so to speak. And we still don't use orange lights for any type of aircraft.
Well, it wasn't even a light, you know. It was like an incandescent light. It wasn't like a bright light, like a light bulb. It was actually different shades of orange pulsated, and it was completely silent. So, and funny enough, I've seen a lot of those reports since. I haven't got a book about it, actually, the orange orbs. I'm going to have Terry, I think what's his name, Terry Ray wrote a book about the orange orb phenomena. I'm hoping to get him on the show in a few weeks.
And certainly, I mean, your case could fit right into his, and maybe he can help answer or just help you draw as far as some additional conclusions of what it was and what it wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, is it true that Stanton I don't think, ever sighted a UFO, did he?
Not that he ever conceded, and that's the amazing thing. Hynek had that famous, for him, sighting. He was on a private aircraft, and he took a picture of a spherical object outside of, the wing, out of the window of the plane. And, it was daylight, and it appeared to be, devoid of wings or tail or anything of that sort. And then to learn afterwards that he had two additional sightings. And there you're talking about, the skeptic who just continuously wrestled with alternative possibilities. That if he couldn't explain it, then it truly was something foreign, something extraordinary.
Absolutely.
But as far as Stan, not that he ever conceded to me, and I may be totally wrong, but he never acknowledged having a personal sighting. No.
He was very heavily into the MJ12 documents, I think, for a number of years, wasn't he?
Yes, and he was to the very end, and that was one of the areas that I took deference with Stan. I felt that there were too many elements within the so-called documents that did not further substantiate them. There were discrepancies in the dating format, discrepancies in the listing of the 12, some of the information. And I was quick to point out there were elements within the documents that, based on our own Roswell investigation, that when we found witnesses, when we established new locations and witnesses that validated certain portions of the MJ12 documents, Stan was the first one I called. We had a standing agreement that whenever he learned of something that supported our scenario, he would contact us and vice versa. So when there were witnesses that further substantiated the MJ12 documents, I was quick to let Stan know. Did it, to me, prove the documents were legitimate? No. I still concede, I still believe that they are disinformation documents. And if you go by the very definition of disinformation, they have to have a semblance of truth to them to essentially establish their own agenda, draw an audience in, and then later to be proven incorrect fallacious in that regard. And so there would be a sprinkling of truth to disinformation documents of that sort.
Yeah, like hiding a tree in the woods sort of thing. You sort of stick a few false pages out there, and you don't know what's the truth and which isn't, do you? In the end.
And in the event, then you're able say researchers, investigators are able to establish the genuineness of specific aspects of a document. They're then intended to then disqualify themselves by other portions that are inconsistent, that discredit certain portions of the other information. So it's all intended to get you essentially to get you in the circular firing squad, that you are never able to fully authenticate the documents. In many ways, it serves as a long-term diversion, a distraction, and it prevents you from honing and from focusing on more legitimate information. And that's often the purpose, at least here in the States, of disinformation documents. It's a major diversion, major distraction.
Yeah.
And in many ways, because Stan, he spent many hours, many days, many weeks trying to authenticate the documents. And it may have been for that purpose that it drew him away from the more legitimate aspects of his own investigation.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, there may be people out there not knowing what we're talking about, the MJ12 documents, and I think it's a bit too detailed to go into. But
yes,
I think you might need to Google it if you don't know what we're talking about.
We'll show on that alone, yes.
But we really ought to get into what you've been doing, Don. I mean, I know this is a bit of a dedication to Stan as well, but you've been doing a lot of important work with the Roswell. I'll tell you a little story, only a short one. When I went to Roswell in 2013, I picked up a booklet called Witness to Roswell, and I brought it home, and it's like a magazine type booklet. And you know what? I had it at the top of my shelf. I looked through it and read it and things, put it at the top of my shelf, and I kind of forgot about it. And then I bought this proper book called Witness to Roswell, the same, and both of them have got Don Schmitt on. I imagine that magazine type document that I first bought
was a journal that was an attachment, just an attachment to the main book, yes.
Ah, right, okay. Yeah, it kind of puzzled me. I thought, we've got two of the same thing, and I thought, well, maybe that was the first try out for the book. But I kind of rediscovered it after. I thought, I've had that sitting up there for a couple of years now. But
well, the actual book, Witness to Roswell, was the #1 selling UFO book in the world for 3 years.
Yeah, it's a brilliant book. Yeah.
And thank you. And it's been optioned. It was quickly optioned by Bryce Zabel, who did the TV series Dark Skies, and it's been optioned for the next motion picture.
Oh, good.
So the motion picture, as scripted, will be about Stanton Friedman and myself.
Excellent.
And how our investigations have at times been, in opposition. We have, at times debated, but more times than not, we have worked together. We have presented a unified front on our Roswell investigation. Wonderful thing about Stan too, in that whenever we would be on a show together, a program, or we would do a documentary together, and we would always talk about, okay, we have to, stand together on what we believe in. And let's not confuse an audience. Let's not create, dissension within our own ranks. Let's present this united front. And we always did, no matter what the forum, no matter what the opportunity. We could even be standing together, presenting a talk. And if there was something either one of us didn't agree on, we still held off. We didn't say anything publicly.
Yeah.
We knew we disagreed, but we didn't want the audience to feel that, oh, there they go again. They're arguing, they're debating in public.
Yeah.
Well, again, it was better to present the professional, the gentlemanly, united front, as I call it. And, we knew, but the audience then always realized that the main issue, the main element that we were presenting as far as between the two of us together was that Roswell indeed was the recovery, the crash of a craft of unknown origin. There were bodies recovered, and that to this day, that it still remains the granddaddy of all UFO cases.
So, your personal belief is that something crashed and something, and it was alien bodies, yeah? I mean, I believe that too.
I should point out, David, and I always do, that I was a complete skeptic on Roswell. In fact, when Stan, who really did the stalwart, research and investigation on the very first Roswell book, Roswell Incident, that came out in 1980.
Yeah.
That was written by Charles Berlitz and Stan's partner at that time, William Moore. And Stan only received a small acknowledgement in the book. And I always felt that was unfair because I knew from the very beginning that Stan did most of the interviews. He did most of the travel, most of the legwork. He did most of the phone interviews. He tracked these people down. And I didn't even buy a copy of the book because up until 1985, I even wrote a small article where I just basically put out a public position that I could not accept that something of that magnitude could be kept a secret for all that time. I just didn't see how, that with all the whistleblowers and people who were always quick to go to the press with a new story, were able to keep this under wraps all that time. And a few years later, and it was right after Hynek had passed away in 86. And then Stan was giving a lecture at Lakeland College in northern Illinois, just north of Chicago. And I was only an hour and a half away. And I told Stan, if I could help him out with the lecture, and, I would be there. And I was backstage afterwards that I had planned to confront Stan and ask him that if he felt that they had taken the Roswell investigation to its zenith. They had taken it as far as they could. And I was quite surprised when Stan responded, well, no, Don, actually, I'm sure there are hundreds of witnesses. We just don't have the manpower. We don't have the wherewithal. And this is long before the internet and in that regard and being able to track people down online. And most of it involved, just a tedious, painstaking effort in tracking witnesses down. And so I asked, well, then could you use some help? And he responded, well, by all means, whatever you could do to help. So I still was a complete skeptic. But in making the first trip down to Roswell in February of 89, so this was in the fall of 88, I approached Stan. He says, welcome to the hunt. By all means, I love your help in all this. And then by actually going to New Mexico and speaking to one first-hand witness after another and them describing firsthand to my face the unusual characteristics of the wreckage, the strange material that they held in their hands that defied conventional explanation even up to today. One by one, and, describing the exact same, nearly indestructible paper-thin material that you either couldn't cut, you couldn't burn, even a bullet wouldn't penetrate, and then the memory material that you also couldn't have any effect as far as in trying to dent or scratch or penetrate with a bullet. And listen to these witnesses, all very believable, and whether they were civilian or military. And we came away going, my God, what if we're wrong? What if these people are describing to us, the genuine recovery of something manufactured off the planet? And we need to get back down here as soon as possible. So that was in February. So in April, 2 months later, we were back. And the hunt just intensified to the point that within a year, we were talking about writing our first book. And that would become the book that was made into the Roswell movie. And so that's how quickly things accelerated to the point that by the time the movie came out in 1994, we had interviewed over 300 new witnesses beyond what Stan and Bill Moore had done leading up to Roswell incident.
Yeah. Did you ever come across any of the fear factor? People frightened to talk because they'd been threatened?
Absolutely. David, I can tell you, more times than not, we had reluctant witnesses. Now, mind you, these were people who, they didn't come to us. We had to search them out. We had to track them down. And as I was describing, it was at a time when we had to actually do credit checks on these people. We checked if they still had pilot's licenses, so we went through air certification. We went through motor vehicle. We did reunion lists as far as military, as far as units that were having reunions, and we would actually go to the hotels and post notices in the lobby of the hotels that we were in room such and such. And if you had any information regarding what transpired at Roswell in 1947, we'd respect your confidentiality, your anonymity, but could you please talk to us? Could you share with us whatever recollections, whatever recall you had on the incident? And one witness leading to another, and so-and-so would say, well, who you really need to talk to, who was out, at the hangar when a lot of this transpired, and when we were ordered to stand guard outside of Building 84, and, so-and-so was on the other end of the hangar at that time. Well, can you help us find him? Well, last information I have, they were in Ohio, and then, that would help us, zero in at least in respective state. But again, our phone bills alone were averaging about $1,000 a month.
Wow.
Because it involved, tracking and talking to a lot of people who could help us zero in on a particular town or a city. And then when you would find them, how more times than not they were reluctant to talk to you. And David, how often the first words out of their mouth would be, how did you find me? Who told you about me? And then it would take repeated phone calls in trying to gain their confidence. And even over the phone, we were just a voice. And we made it a rule that we like to speak to the witnesses face to face. So then we found ourselves traveling not just to New Mexico, but to Texas, to Ohio, to Arizona, Nevada, state of Washington, state of Montana, New York. Oh, many of them retired in Florida, so we were spending a lot of time in Florida. And we would be knocking on doors, and many times blindly, not even expecting them to allow us in to chat, to even do an interview. And more times than not, we would get the door closed on us. I have nothing to say. I have nothing more to say about 1947. Or, surprisingly, before we would even bring it up, they would say, well, I'll talk about anything except 1947, because that I have nothing more to say about.
Yeah. In fact, I don't think a lot of people realise that when you write a book like you've written, The Witness to Roswell, or any others like this, the research that goes into it and the cost in the travelling around and the telephone calls, like you said, $1,000 a month. It's amazing, isn't it? The costs that add up. And I mean, when someone might complain that a book costs $20 or whatever, you think, well, it's cost an awful lot more than that to do all the research that you're reading about. So,
and now when you actually are published, in the past, if it was a $20 book, you'd make a couple dollars on retail sales. Now you're lucky if you make 50 cents.
Yeah, I know. My friend, I don't know if you've heard of John Hanson, who writes the Haunted Skies books. He's thousands of pounds in debt, but he's so dedicated to writing the books, getting the books out there that he just basically he'll never retain that, get that money back.
No. And that's it. It's one thing if you're a Stephen King or a Tom Clancy, where you essentially write fiction.
Yeah.
Where you don't have to conduct all the research. You don't have to log all the miles in speaking to witnesses and track down sources for your information.
Well, like any research you need, you can sit in front of your computer and do it, can't you? That's basically what.
Yes. And in the past, it took years to write a book, to compile enough data. And then you had to decide, okay, now when do I cut it off? When do I finally sit down and start writing at the expense of conducting the further research? And with Roswell, as we always said, we were racing the Undertaker. We still would have to sit down and devote much more time to actually writing the actual book. But in the meantime, witnesses were passing away. They were getting away from us. And I can't tell you, David, the frustration of how often we would find a witness through all this painstaking effort. We would finally locate the whereabouts of a potential witness, and we would have the family tell us, well, sorry to tell you, but, my husband just passed away a year ago. Or, my dad just died a couple months ago. We actually had a wife tell us, I'm just returning from the funeral. And you realize that for the sake of some weeks, some months, a year, and that information is gone forever.
It's so sad, isn't it?
The finality of it. And most people have never been there. Most people will sit and critique a game from the sidelines for never having played it. And they're quick to always, well, you should have done and could have done, and why didn't you? Well, we do it at our own cost. We do it at our own expense. We write books, and then we get criticized. Well, you're doing this just to write books. You're doing this just to make money. Well, I don't see you contributing to our research. I don't see you offering the help. God knows we've had many a Monday morning quarterback, as they would call here in the States, who have offered to help. And then a month later, well, you offered to talk to a neighbor of yours who may have been involved. Have you chatted with them yet? Well, no, it's on my list. I need to talk to them before they die. Yes. And then they never do. They still never did.
Yeah, if only they realise what the costs are involved in doing a book like this. I really do. I do appreciate that Tom. It's amazing. Now, I was going to actually go on to with the Roswell. There were bodies retrieved, no doubt.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Now you remember the film that came out in the mid '80s, the Alien Autopsy, which fooled everybody for some time. I was one of the ones I got fooled by it too. Did you get fooled by it or?
No, in fact, we immediately, and much to his credit, Philip Mantle was sending us stills, images from the video. And I call it a video because that's all we've ever seen, a video. And we would show those images to our first-hand witnesses to the bodies. And the fact that not a one of them even suggests there was anything close. That's all we had to hear.
Right.
I mean, they were the authorities. They were there. And for them to say, no, this is like nothing I encountered. This isn't what I saw back in 1947. So we stood back and we allowed, as far as that press conference in London, where it was first released, and then one of our people, one of the people who was working with us at that time, Kent Jeffrey, he actually flew over to London, was there at the press conference, the release of the film, and he walked out when he said that it was that unconvincing that he walked away calling us and saying, Don, you guys are right. It's not anything as the witnesses described. And that's when I immediately contacted Philip, because when he and Michael Hessman from Germany were immediately calling it the Roswell autopsy, we asked them, in fact, we insisted that they would not call it Roswell in any shape, manner, or form. That as far as we were concerned, that if there was anything legitimate, anything genuine about the autopsy, it had nothing to do with Roswell. If anything, it was a separate event. And then, to their credit, they did drop the connection to Roswell. And then, David, you might recall that they described that it was a separate event that happened a month before.
Yeah.
In June, early June of 1947, not early July, as Roswell was called.
Yeah.
And as when it came out on Fox television, and there were special effects artists like Stan Winston in Hollywood who described that if it was a fake, it was a good fake. It was of special effects level. We still backed off. We still were waiting for the alleged photographer. And then when there was no photographer, nobody was ever presented as being the actual photographer who filmed or had stored the autopsy footage, we then became more and more critical to the point that we just labeled the entire thing a hoax.
Yeah.
That realized that there were certain techniques of the autopsy that were not consistent. The incisions were a typical with the hand in the foreground, where you do not actually see the incision. It would demonstrate that was a Hollywood technique. The breathing, the contamination, uniforms that the autopsy individuals were wearing were not self-contained back in 1947. There were hoses and tubes going every which way. There were, and the way they were plucking, and without being overly graphic, just pulling the internal organs out as though everything was loose, within the torso cavity of the body. That would not have been the case. Everything also would have had to have been cut away. It would have been a long, drawn-out process. They would have been much more precise, given if they were dealing with a visitor, a body, an alien, from another planet, that this just wouldn't have been so routine. And that was something else that bothered us. So more and more we realized that it was a hoax, it was a good hoax, and that there are many people that still, believe in it.
Yeah, there is. I don't know if you've met Spiros Belarus, have you? He's a friend of mine. He's did a show with me on here.
I met him when he went forward, when Philip had the conference in Leeds, when he went public for the first time. And explained how, as a magician that he put this all together.
Yeah.
And
it was all done in Camden Town in London, in a back room in Camden Town.
And the fact that he was able to, describe in detail how they did, they carried out each part of the autopsy, how they were able to, as far as make it as believable as it was, and yet, it wasn't. The biggest giveaway, David, was the fact that it wasn't anything close to what the witnesses at Roswell described.
Yeah, that was the big giveaway for you. Yeah.
And again, I will tip my hat. I will always credit both Philip Mantle and Michael Hessman. At the moment, we asked them, please do not draw any connection to Roswell with this. And they immediately backed off. They immediately didn't. They no longer labeled it the Roswell alien autopsy. Now the press and the skeptics love to do that. Anytime something can be disproven, they will immediately toss it into the Roswell as far as a affair.
That's right. Yeah, it all helps the fake news story, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, control the narrative. In other words, whenever there's anything negative, whenever there's a witness that might be discredited or proven who was not part of the incident, well, let's make sure that they're forever labeled and connected to Roswell. Well, sorry, the autopsy film was never connected to Roswell. Even to the believers, it is not connected to Roswell. And again, thank you to Philip, thank you to Michael, that they too were willing to respect that request on our part.
Absolutely. I mean, even Philip was fooled by it in the first place anyway, wasn't he? So I think the thing that gave it away for me, well, not so much give it away, but why didn't they film it in colour? I mean, they had coloured cameras back then.
Of course they did. And again, for something unique, for something that is, once in a lifetime, that you would go out and make sure you did everything to essentially freeze frame, make it that moment in time that would be forever preserved. And as I said, it was too routine. It was treated as though, and unless it could be demonstrated that this was one of many prior to, but again, we were always led to believe that this was the first. This was the first and, genuine autopsy on an alien recovered at a crash site in New Mexico. And, sorry, it did not measure up.
Well, I think everyone got caught up in it and thinking, is it true? Is it true? And I think it's become legendary. Yeah, there are still people out there that believe it's real. Now.
And if we're going to believe Roswell, we know there is a genuine autopsy. We know there is genuine footage. There is film somewhere. But, that's why it's still labeled a cover-up. That after all these years, even the presidents here in the States do not have access. That's why we have former presidents like Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton talk about how, I had 8 years in the Oval Office and I could not get the truth about Roswell. Well, if even the office of the president isn't afforded, that opportunity, then that would continue to demonstrate just how big a secret this is.
Yeah. Well, there's obviously somebody way behind the scenes pulling the strings there, isn't there? Like a secret controlling government, do you think?
Well, we talked about MJ-12, and it may be, David, just a case of that, whereas the documents weren't genuine, was there an oversight committee appointed? Absolutely. In fact, even General Arthur Exxon, who was at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, where the wreckage and the bodies were transferred back in 1947. And he was a former base commander at Wright-Patterson in 1964. So he was aware of the wreckage coming there in 47. He was aware of the bodies coming there in 47. And the fact that when he worked at the Pentagon in Washington, he always heard of the oversight committee appointed by President Harry Truman to oversee the entire Roswell situation. But they weren't called MJ-12 according to General Exxon. They were called the Unholy 13. So you would appoint this group of individuals to get you all the answers, oversee the entire operation, determine what we're dealing with here, determine the level of technology. Where are they from? Why are they here? Can we reverse engineer the technology? What can we essentially determine as to, is this a threat? Is this benign? Is this something malevolent? Is this something that we can assist in our own technology? And given it has taken now all these years, it becomes a committee, a group that supersedes the office of the presidency here in the States. So it continues on year after year, year after year, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and blacker and deeper to the point that there's no accountability. It becomes a government within the government. And I believe, for example, that when President Harry Truman appointed the group, and then when the next president, Dwight Eisenhower, when he was retiring and he made that prediction and that concern of the military-industrial complex, that's who we should be concerned of. That's what we should watch. That as the United States military does not manufacture anything. And I know it's the same in the UK. Everything is contracted out to the private sector for every ship, every plane, every tank. And those private corporations, in providing for our respective militaries, they're in many ways calling the shots. They're dictating to the military, now this is what you want. This is what we can make you. This is what we can invent for you. But you will take what we give you. And as a result, they become almost the secret government in that regard.
Yeah. The Philip Corso story. How do you look at that? Because he wrote the book the day after Roswell, and that very much goes into the reverse engineering and.
Corso was correct in all the attempts at the reverse engineering, and he was absolutely correct in how they would have assimilated this wreckage, this technology into the private sector. Through the last 30 years of our investigation, we've had first-hand witnesses at RAND Corporation, at the Bureau of Standards, at Battelle Institute, at General Electric, at Battelle Institute, all receiving wreckage from Roswell for their testing, their analysis, with the hope that somebody, as they would say, would find the on button. Somebody would be able to actually, crack the code, so to speak, and figure out how this thing flies. And here we are after all this time, and I'm still convinced they still can't find the on button. We're still flying, rockets and jets. And so Corso was correct about that. The only thing Corso was not correct is that he relied on people who were not legitimate to provide them with the scenario of what transpired at the time of the incident.
Oh, I see.
In fact, we learned afterwards that Corso made a couple of research trips to Roswell before the book was compiled and then written. And he unfortunately relied on the wrong people in putting together the chain of events. He was correct about the analysis and the efforts in testing and determining the pedigree of the wreckage. But as to the chronology of what happened and who was involved, he relied on the wrong people. And so and we did correct him about that, but he ran out of time too, as we know.
Yeah. Because he had quite an important job in the Pentagon as well, didn't he?
Yes, he did, but he only retired, a lieutenant colonel. So he would have far from had full access to a lot of the data.
That's true, yeah.
I always find one of the skeptics is Colonel John Alexander over here in the States. And I always remind John, you're only a colonel. You hardly would have had access that a general or a 4-star general would have had. And we have a good laugh over that.
I suppose we ought to touch on the Bob Lazar thing. I mean, I don't know how far you want to get into that. We've only got about 4, 5, 6 minutes or so, 7 minutes. Do you think he's on the level, or?
I accept that Bob Lazar was witness to something. And I say that from a different vantage point, and that through the years we've had inside sources who previously worked at Project Blue Book, for example, the most famous of the 3 official United States Air Force investigations. And they would describe to us that they were investigators for Project Blue Book. Not at Wright-Patterson in Dayton, Ohio, but they would be at different locations, at different bases throughout the states. And they would describe how they would be taken into a room, a screening room, and they would be shown a film footage. A projector would start rolling, and they would be the only other person in the room aside from this doctor or someone in a white smock with a clipboard. And the film would start rolling, and they would watch what would appear to be, gun camera footage, and all at once there would be a flying saucer in broad daylight, a dome disc, outmaneuvering and outperforming, the aircraft, flying rings around them, literally. And the person standing there, not watching the film, would watch this investigator and write down notes as to the manner in which they behaved, the manner in which they reacted. So we saw that as being a trial balloon, as though, okay, let's see how they react to the real thing. Well, then we would have subsequent investigators who would talk about being taken to an underground room, and they would be taken to a room where a stretcher would be pulled out, and there would be a cadaver. There would be a body. And once again, a doctor in a smock and observe how they would react to it, as though they would panic, as though they would faint from shock, or if they were just mesmerized and just totally enthralled, by what they were observing. So continuing that, I see it possible that Lazar may have also had such an opportunity. He was allowed to see a ship, a recovered craft from another crash retrieval incident. But the problem I have is, as whistleblowers go, and if we cite like Edward Snowden here in the States, who had to flee the country, Lazar was able to talk about this publicly. It didn't appear as though he was in fear for his life. He described all this, and no one stopped him. Now, was it intended that he would discredit himself by describing such an unbelievable story? Was Lazar spreading disinformation in the same vein as the MJ-12 documents were spreading disinformation? Was it intended to muddy the waters? Or was it, again, a trial balloon? Let's see how the public react. From watching film to seeing a cadaver to now describing working at Area 51 and actually seeing a recovered craft. So my judgment, my position on Bob Lazar remains totally fluid. I'm willing to accept that he saw something. Whether it was legit or not, time will tell. But I'm not so quick as to discredit somebody just because their backgrounds, just because all the numbers don't add up. Because, again, we're dealing with a phenomenon that God knows the numbers don't add up. We have to remain fluid. We just can't, as they would say, throw out the baby with the bathwater just because we don't like the way it appears, the way it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I kind of believed Bob Lazar for about 20 years, well, maybe just under 20 years, and then suddenly, just recently, with all this new film that's come out and everything, I'm sort of having my doubts because I've seen quite a few false things, but things that don't add up, like you say. So I don't know. I'm kind of sitting on the fence like you really now.
And I have high respect for George Knapp. The fact that George Knapp is one of our only media, one of our only journalists here in the States that is a go-to person for anyone who has a legitimate UFO experience. And George, I mean, he has remained a staunch supporter. He's the one who broke the story originally of Bob Lazar. And the fact that 30 years later, he is still 100% behind George, as far as George Knapp is 100% behind Bob Lazar. And to me, that's worth a lot more than the fact that certain things don't add up, because George Knapp, as a true legitimate journalist, as a newsman, he has done more to investigate Bob Lazar than anyone. And if he stands with him, I'm still willing to reserve judgment.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, he's the man that, I'll have to look more into it, obviously. But anyway, this has been fantastic, Don. Thank you so much for giving up your time to come on here. Maybe I can get you back on again sometime when the film comes out and everything.
I would be happy to.
But,
keep me on your list. And certainly, we hope you come back to the States. You come back to Roswell sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to. I really do keep saying every year I've got to get back, but it's finding the pennies to do it with.
I know that. That's the whole thing about investigation as well. Yes, it's at the cost and expense of one's own lifestyle that ufology has always existed on a shoestring, hasn't it?
Yes, it certainly has, my friend. But anyway, I do hope to speak to you again, Don. It's been a pleasure. And once again, my sincere condolences for the loss of Stan. Well, it's a great loss to us all, but you especially, because he was a good friend of yours. So,
well, we will keep up the effort, and then Stan would wish us to end it, to finish the fight. And
pick up that baton and run with it, yeah.
For help, David, and with all the others, we will certainly finish what Stan started in many ways.
Anyway, thank you very much, Don. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you, and I really do hope you'll stay in touch, and we'll speak again. But
I will do that indeed.
You take care of yourself. Thank you, Don. Right,
thank you, David.
You've been listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network with Paranormal Dimensions. I'm David Young. Goodbye, and thank you for listening. I'm sorry we're out of time. Thanks, Don. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, David.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Paranormal Dimensions is as bright and powerful as our celestial star, the sun. And although it's expending thousands of pounds of energy every minute of the day, have no fear. There's plenty left.
Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.